His family threw him out, not knowing he was the sole heir to a vast fortune. The will reading changed everything. The opulent chandelier in the grand ballroom of the Sterling Hotel shimmered, casting a deceptive glow upon the faces gathered below. Its crystal facets caught the ambient light, refracting it into 1,000 tiny, glittering deceptions, much like the meticulously crafted smiles and polite pleasantries exchanged throughout the room. This was the annual Sterling Family Gala, an event usually marked by an almost suffocating air of propriety and inherited privilege, but tonight, an undercurrent of tension, thick and palpable, coiled beneath the polished surface. A sense of impending shift, subtle yet undeniable, permeated the air, though most attendees were too engrossed in their own self-importance to perceive it. At the very edge of the main gathering, near a potted palm that offered scant concealment, stood a figure who, until recently, had been the subject of hushed ridicule and open scorn. This was Caelan Sterling, or rather, the man who had presented himself for weeks as Alistair Finch. He watched Seraphina, his self-proclaimed aunt, airily dismiss a server. Her manicured hand, adorned with rings that glittered like miniature constellations, waved away a tray of canapés as if they were nothing more than bothersome dust motes. A faint scent of her expensive perfume, cloyingly sweet, drifted across the space, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity he now cultivated. Beside her, Julian, his cousin, chuckled, his eyes scanning the room, undoubtedly calculating the net worth of every guest, assessing their potential utility. They were in their element, utterly oblivious to the quiet storm brewing. Caelan, or Alistair as they knew him, had been an inconvenient, unsightly stain on their perfect social fabric, a blot quickly scrubbed away, their dismissive acts replaying in the silent theater of his mind. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on Caelan's lips, a private, knowing curve that went unseen by the glittering throng. The moment was ripe, a perfectly constructed stage for the grand unveiling. Every sneer, every thinly veiled insult, every act of outright cruelty he had endured over the past weeks had been a necessary thread in the intricate tapestry of this singular, incandescent moment. A flicker of satisfaction resonated deep within him, a cool and steady flame. The sweet irony of it all was almost intoxicating. They, the mighty Seraphina and Julian, who prided themselves on their sharp intellect and even sharper business acumen, were about to be outmaneuvered by the very destitute relative they had so contemptuously discarded. They saw a pauper, he saw pawns, each move they made merely serving to tighten the noose of their own making. He took a slow, deliberate sip from the water glass in his hand, the ice clinking softly against the crystal, a tiny, almost inaudible chime in the grand symphony of their ignorance. The cold liquid was a refreshing counterpoint to the simmering anticipation within him. The game, he mused, was finally over, or rather, the initial moves were complete, and now it was time for the final, devastating play. His gaze, once filled with a faint meekness, now held an unyielding resolve, a cold glint that promised reckoning. Soon, very soon, the chandelier's light, which now highlighted their opulence, would instead reveal the shadows, the true nature of the hearts beating beneath the expensive fabric of their attire. The audience, though unaware of their role as witnesses, was about to witness a drama far more compelling than any they could have imagined. And the star, the forgotten, ridiculed Alistair Finch, was about to take his final, devastating bow, pulling back the curtain on a truth they had desperately sought to keep hidden. Caelan Sterling was a man forged in the crucible of immense wealth and profound solitude. His earliest memories were not of playful romps in sun-drenched fields, but of hushed hallways and sprawling estates, of nannies and tutors, and the distant yet loving presence of his parents. He was the sole heir to Sterling Enterprises, a conglomerate that spanned continents and industries, a name synonymous with power, innovation, and an almost mythical fortune. Yet, for all his material blessings, Caelan carried a deep-seated weariness, a disillusionment born from years of witnessing the corrosive effects of greed, particularly within his own extended family. His parents, wise and benevolent philanthropists, had instilled in him a strong sense of duty and compassion, always emphasizing that wealth was a responsibility, not a right. They had taught him to look beyond the glittering surface, to truly see people. But they had passed away years prior, too soon, leaving him to navigate the treacherous waters of his inheritance alone, the weight of their lessons a constant, yet comforting burden. He had watched his Aunt Seraphina, ostensibly a pillar of society, manipulate charitable trusts for personal gain, her philanthropy a hollow performance for the cameras. A meticulously staged show designed to enhance her image rather than truly help those in need. He remembered a specific instance, a charity gala where funds meant for a struggling children's hospital somehow ended up financing a new wing for her country club, cleverly disguised through a labyrinthine series of shell corporations. He had seen his cousin Julian, a supposed prodigy in finance, siphon funds from struggling subsidiaries, always just within the bounds of legality, always with a plausible deniability that made Kaylin's stomach churn. Julian's brilliance was undeniable, but it was a cold, calculating brilliance, used to exploit every loophole to squeeze every last drop from those less fortunate. Kaylin had observed them over the years, a growing disquiet in his heart. They were vultures in designer suits, circling the vast sterling fortune, eager for the day Kaylin would either falter or, more desirably for them, expire, leaving the spoils open for their plundering. Their veiled questions about his health, his marital status, his long-term plans had always carried a predatory undertone he could not ignore. The tipping point had come 6 months prior. Kaylin had been recovering from a serious, though not life-threatening, illness. A rare fever had left him bedridden, his body weakened, his mind unusually lucid. During his convalescence, he had overheard hushed conversations just beyond his semi-private hospital room. It was Serafina and Julian, their voices hushed, their inquiries seemingly innocent, yet laced with an almost ghoulish curiosity. They spoke of his will, of the health of his investments, about the future of the sterling legacy. Their concern was not for his well-being, but for the perceived delay in his demise, an inconvenience to their impatient ambitions. He heard Serafina sighing about the burden of his prolonged illness, Julian muttering about diversifying portfolios, in the event of unforeseen circumstances. It was then, lying in a hospital bed, weakened but acutely aware, that Kaylin saw them for what they truly were. Not family but parasites, their greed an insatiable maw. The love, the familial bond he had yearned for, the connection he hoped wealth would not entirely erode, was a mirage, shimmering tantalizingly but always receding into the desert of their avarice. A profound chill settled over him, colder than any fever. His trust, already fragile from years of subtle betrayals, shattered completely. He realized that for all his power and wealth he was blind. The gilded cage of his fortune had shielded him from the raw truth of human nature. He couldn't distinguish genuine affection from calculated flattery, true loyalty from opportunistic sycophancy. He needed a test, a crucible not just for them but for himself. He needed to strip away the layers of his identity, shed the formidable persona of Kaylin Sterling, and become someone utterly insignificant, someone who possessed nothing, so that he might truly see who possessed kindness. He had to know if there was any true humanity left within his world. The idea for Alistair Finch was born from this desperate need for clarity. Alistair would be a distant, forgotten cousin, a distant branch on the family tree that had withered and fallen, yet still felt entitled to a small crumb from the sterling feast. Kaylin meticulously crafted Alistair's backstory. A once promising career derailed by unfortunate circumstances, a series of bad investments, a lost home, leaving him adrift and desperate. He worked with a private investigator he implicitly trusted, a discreet man named Silas Vance, to create fake documents, convincing financial records of his fictional insolvency, a fabricated Social Security history, even a series of plausible though unsuccessful job applications. He altered his appearance subtly but effectively. A less polished haircut, styled to appear a little frayed at the edges, slightly ill-fitting but clean clothes, carefully chosen to convey respectability without wealth, a demeanor of quiet humility bordering on defeat, a subtle slump to his shoulders that hinted at burdens carried. He practiced his new persona in front of a mirror, learning to carry the weight of perceived destitution, to speak with a slight hesitance, to meet gazes with a careful, almost apologetic shyness. It was an arduous, emotionally taxing process, forcing him to confront his own vulnerabilities and the potential for cruelty in others. His plan was simple yet profoundly ambitious. He would approach Serafina and Julian, not as Kaylin Sterling, the powerful heir, but as Alistair Finch, the humble supplicant. He would ask for a small amount of aid, a temporary place to stay, a chance to get back on his feet. He would test the very fabric of their familial duty, their compassion, their humanity. A wry smirk touched his lips in the privacy of his study. Kaylin wasn't just testing them, He was testing the very concept of inherited wealth, the idea that blood ties automatically conferred moral obligation. He was seeking a truth that wealth, in its blinding splendor, often obscured. He sought to find if any flicker of genuine human warmth remained amidst the cold, hard calculus of their self-interest. The thought of their reactions, the inevitable contempt, was a bitter pill he knew he had to swallow, for the sake of a greater, undeniable truth. The stage was set and Kalen, now thoroughly immersed in his role as Alistair Finch, began his painful masquerade. His first target was Aunt Seraphina, the matriarch of the family's social aspirations, whose life was a perpetual performance for high society. Alistair arrived at her sprawling, manicured estate, a modest suitcase in hand, its worn leather a silent testament to his fabricated journey. His clothes, though clean, were clearly well worn, hinting at a life where every thread counted. He rang the bell, the chime echoing through the vast emptiness of the foyer, his heart a strange mix of apprehension and a detached, almost scientific curiosity. The maid, a stern woman with a perpetually unimpressed expression and a uniform that seemed too starched even for a palace, eyed him suspiciously before reluctantly allowing him into the grand foyer. The air within was heavy with the scent of lilies and old money, a scent that felt alien to Alistair's newly adopted skin. Seraphina descended the sweeping staircase, her designer dress, a shimmering cascade of silk, rustling like a serpent's scales, her smile a thin, brittle line that barely touched her eyes. She recognized the name, Finch, from some distant, dusty corner of the family tree, a branch best forgotten, an inconvenient ancestral footnote. Her gaze swept over his humble attire, a silent assessment of his worth, or lack thereof. Alistair, dear boy, she purred, though her voice lacked any genuine warmth, the words clipped, as if she were trying to expel them quickly. What a surprise! To what do we owe this unexpected visit? Her tone was laced with an almost imperceptible disdain, as if he were an uninvited insect that had somehow bypassed her elaborate security. Her eyes were already dissecting his appearance, cataloging every perceived flaw, every sign of his supposed destitution. Alistair, playing his part to perfection, explained his plight with a quiet dignity, recounting the fabricated tale of misfortune, the loss of his modest import business due to a sudden market downturn, the series of bad investments made in a desperate attempt to recover, the foreclosure on his small home, leaving him adrift and desperate, nowhere else to turn. He spoke of his desire to rebuild, to simply find a foothold, not charity but a chance. Seraphina listened, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching higher with each unfortunate detail, her face a mask of feigned sympathy that barely concealed her thinly veiled impatience. Good heavens, Alistair, how dreadful, she finally exclaimed, though her voice lacked any genuine warmth, her words seeming to echo the emptiness of the grand foyer. A guest room? Here? My dear, you must understand, my schedule is absolutely packed. Charity galas, board meetings, and the staff, you see, they are simply overwhelmed with preparations for the upcoming winter ball. She paused, her gaze drifting to a priceless Ming vase on a nearby pedestal, as if to emphasize the sanctity and fragility of her home, too precious to be sullied by a forgotten relative. Perhaps a small sum to help you find a more suitable arrangement? A hotel, perhaps, until you get back on your feet. She named a paltry sum, barely enough for a single night at a decent motel, certainly not enough to make a dent in a man's destitution. She seemed to calculate not what he needed, but the absolute minimum required to avoid social scandal, to make him disappear with the least possible fuss. The narrator noted the subtle but telling gesture, a hand reaching not for a checkbook, but for a delicate porcelain teacup, as if the very thought of his presence sullied her refined environment. He was not a relative in need, but a problem to be neatly contained and quickly dismissed, a minor inconvenience to her perfectly ordered life. Rejected but unsurprised, Alistair then turned to Julian, bracing himself for a different, yet equally disheartening, form of disdain. Julian's hospitality proved to be even more overtly cruel, cloaked in a veneer of cynical pragmatism. He greeted Alistair at his penthouse apartment, not with a maid, but with a sneer, a knowing glint in his sharp eyes. Alistair? Ah yes, the forgotten branch, Julian declared, a cynical amusement in his voice, as if Alistair were a particularly amusing anecdote. Heard about your unfortunate circumstances from Aunt Seraphina. Rough luck, old chap. He ushered Alistair into a minimalist living room. All cold marble, stark lines, and abstract art. A space designed for impressing, not for living. Julian, ever the businessman, saw not a distressed relative, but a potential investment, or rather a potential drain, something to be exploited or discarded. Alistair repeated his story, emphasizing his willingness to work for his keep, to prove his worth despite his current situation. Julian chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound that scraped against Alistair's ears. Work? My dear Alistair, you wouldn't last a day in my world. The pace, the demands. It's brutal. But I suppose everyone deserves a chance, right? He snapped his fingers, a sharp, dismissive sound. Tell you what. My new startup, Eco Solutions, it's all about sustainability, very cutting edge, very green, you understand. We could use someone to organize the recycling bins and perhaps clean the break room. Just until you get on your feet, eh? It's not much, but it's honest work. Julian spoke of it as if offering a grand opportunity, a magnanimous gesture, while his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of having found a cheap, disposable laborer. The pay he offered was insulting, a fraction of minimum wage, just enough to keep Alistair tethered but perpetually struggling, unable to truly escape. He even suggested Alistair could sleep on a cot in the office storage room, a windowless cubicle filled with dusty boxes, as if it were a generous act, not a dehumanizing one. The narrator watched, a bitter taste in his metaphorical mouth, as Julian reveled in his petty power, oblivious to the true power he was so carelessly insulting, trampling on the very dignity he claimed to be preserving. The final act of their cruelty came swiftly, an almost choreographed dismissal designed to ensure Alistair's complete and utter removal. After a week of humiliating work for Julian, which mostly involved menial tasks far below anything Alistair had implied he could do, scrubbing toilets, sorting trash, fetching coffee for junior associates who treated him with the same condescension as Julian, and receiving the meager, insulting pay, a joint decision was made. Serafina, feigning concern for Alistair's dignity and the unsuitable environment he found himself in, and Julian, citing lack of productivity and the untenable situation of his office storage room cot, orchestrated his expulsion. One evening, as Alistair finished scrubbing the last coffee stain from Julian's break room counter, a task that felt particularly degrading, Julian entered, Serafina on a video call on his tablet, her face framed by a halo of expensive light. Her expression a careful blend of faux regret and unmistakable relief. Alistair, Julian began, his voice devoid of any warmth, as if delivering bad news to a stranger. We've been discussing your situation. Serafina and we truly believe it's for the best if you seek opportunities elsewhere. This isn't working out for anyone involved. Serafina's voice crackled from the tablet. Yes, dear boy, it's simply not fitting. We care for you, of course, but sometimes tough love is necessary. You need to stand on your own 2 feet, make your own way, as we have had to do. The hypocrisy of her words was a searing burn in Alistair's mind. They presented him with a one-way bus ticket to a distant city, a fresh start, they called it, along with a final, meager sum, barely enough to cover a few meals. The underlying message was clear: get out, and never darken our doorstep again. They stood there, smug and self-satisfied, convinced they had handled a difficult situation with grace and firmness, patting themselves on the back for their imagined benevolence. The narrator observed their performance, a masterpiece of callous indifference, and felt a cold fury stirring within Kaelin, a burning certainty that their reckoning would be swift and thorough. They had not just expelled him, they had humiliated him, stripped him of any semblance of worth, and cast him adrift with a smile, sealing their own fate with every dismissive gesture. The irony, the narrator mused, was that they thought they were getting rid of a burden when in fact they were signing away their entire future. Cast out, Alistair wandered the unfamiliar streets, the bus ticket clutched in his hand like a burning ember. The city lights blurred around him, a kaleidoscope of indifference. He found himself in a part of the city he hadn't frequented since childhood, the older, more working-class neighborhoods near the industrial zones, ironically, not far from the very first Sterling factory, a monument to the family's origins, now overshadowed by their immense impersonal wealth. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a desolation that, even though engineered, felt acutely, physically real. The weight of his adopted poverty pressed down on him, a tangible burden. He bought a simple, cheap meal from a street vendor, a hot dog from a cart, the taste of which was far more honest and satisfying than any lavish banquet he had ever attended in his true identity. As dusk settled, casting long, purple shadows, a small, unassuming community garden caught his eye. It was an oasis amidst the urban sprawl, a patch of vibrant green in a world of concrete and steel. An elderly woman was tending to a patch of wilting flowers, her movement slow but diligent, her face etched with the wisdom of a life lived close to the earth. He sat on a worn park bench, watching her, a strange sense of calm settling over him amidst the turmoil, a quiet moment of respite from the carefully constructed misery of his disguise. Just then, a young woman emerged from a small, dilapidated cottage adjacent to the garden. She carried a watering can, her clothes simple, her hands calloused, testament to honest labor, but her face held a quiet strength, an innate kindness that seemed to radiate even in the dimming light. This was Heir. Heir, whose family had worked as groundskeepers for the Sterling estate for generations, a lineage of quiet, hard-working individuals who knew the land and its secrets better than the Sterling family themselves, who had simply owned it. Kalen, as a boy, had often slipped away from his tutors, weary of Latin and economics, to spend time with the groundskeepers, listening to their stories, learning about nature, about the true cycles of life and growth, far removed from the sterile world of finance. He had almost forgotten Heir, who was a few years his junior, but a flicker of memory stirred within him as he watched her. He remembered a small girl with bright, curious eyes, always helping her father, always with a ready, gentle smile. He had once, years ago, when he was just a child and she barely a teenager, intervened when Serafina's imperious maid had unfairly accused Heir's younger brother, Matteo, of stealing a garden tool. Kalen had known the truth, had seen the maid pocket the tool herself, intending to blame Matteo for her own negligence, and had quietly ensured justice was served, earning a silent, grateful nod from Heir's father. A memory that now felt like a faint echo from a different lifetime. Heir noticed him then, a lone figure on the bench looking disheveled, but with an air of quiet contemplation that seemed out of place among the usual loiterers. She felt a pang of empathy, a familiar ache for those who struggled. Her family, despite their long history with the wealthy Sterlings, had always lived simply, often struggling. Her aging parents relied on her meager income from odd jobs, cleaning houses for indifferent employers, gardening for small businesses, tutoring local children in the evenings. Her younger brother, Matteo, had recently fallen ill with a chronic respiratory condition, adding to their already immense financial strain. Life was a constant tightrope walk, but Heir held on to her values with an unwavering grip, her spirit unbent by hardship. She approached him cautiously, her voice soft, gentle, devoid of judgment. "Are you all right, sir? You look lost." Alistair, unaccustomed to such genuine concern, to a voice that did not demand or dismiss, felt a strange warmth spread through him, a feeling he had almost forgotten. "Just contemplating," he replied, a hint of weariness, a genuine fatigue born from emotional strain in his voice. He offered a concise, modified version of his fabricated story, omitting the family name, simply presenting himself as a man who had lost everything and was trying to find his way, searching for a purpose. Heir listened intently, her eyes reflecting genuine sympathy, a deep well of understanding. She remembered the young Master Kalen, how he had always treated her family with respect, unlike the others. She saw a similar spark of quiet dignity in Alistair, despite his circumstances, something that transcended his worn clothes. "It's a tough world out there," she said, her voice gentle. "My family, we've had our share of hard times too, but we always found a way together." She paused, then, with a decision born of pure, unadulterated kindness, a spontaneous act of humanity, she added, "We're just about to have dinner. It's simple, just stew and bread, but there's enough. If you haven't eaten, please join us." Kalen, hidden beneath the layers of Alistair, was profoundly moved. Here was a woman struggling herself, whose own life was a daily battle, who offered not judgment, not a paltry sum to get rid of him, but the warmth of her home and a shared meal, the most basic, most fundamental act of human connection. It was an act of genuine compassion, born not of obligation or calculation, but of an inherent goodness that shone brighter than any diamond, more brilliant than any chandelier in a grand ballroom. He saw the worn state of her clothes, the tired lines around her eyes, the evidence of her hard life, but also the resolute kindness that emanated from her, a quiet strength. The contrast with Serafina and Julian was stark, almost comical in its brutal clarity. The narrator, observing this pivotal moment, understood that this single selfless act of kindness had already begun to rewrite the ending of Kalen Sterling's grand play, transforming it from a mere tale of vengeance into a profound exploration of human value. Over the next few days, Alistair found a humble sanctuary with Alara and her family. The small cottage, though modest, radiated a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. He helped in the garden, planting seeds, weeding rows, his hands surprisingly adept despite their usual experience with only paperwork. He ran errands for Alara's aging parents, listened to their stories of the old Sterling estate, their quiet wisdom a balm to his soul. He saw Alara's quiet struggles firsthand, the thin, almost transparent, envelope containing Mateo's medicine that strained their meager budget, the worn-out shoes she couldn't afford to replace, the constant worry etched on her parents' faces as they discussed overdue bills. Yet, through it all, she never complained. She smiled, she worked tirelessly, and she continued to offer Alistair the same unwavering kindness, sharing what little they had without hesitation, without a single question of his worthiness. She even helped him search for odd jobs, despite her own endless tasks, offering advice and encouragement, her belief in him unwavering. He observed her interactions with her neighbors, her generosity with her time and meager resources, her unwavering belief in the inherent good of people, a stark contrast to the cynical world he inhabited. Kaelin, living as Alistair, found something he hadn't known he was truly seeking. A connection to unadulterated humanity, untainted by the pursuit of wealth, unburdened by social pretense. He saw the true measure of character, not in the size of one's bank account, but in the generosity of one's spirit, in the quiet strength of empathy. The discomfort of his disguise melted away, replaced by a deep respect and admiration for Alara, a profound sense of peace. He understood then that the test was not just for Serafina and Julian. It was also for him a crucial self-assessment. It was to remind him of what truly mattered, to expose the true worth hidden beneath the veneer of poverty, to reaffirm his own moral compass. He knew with absolute certainty that his vast fortune, his legacy, would not fall into the grasping hands of those who had scorned him. It would instead find its way to where it could truly make a difference, guided by a heart as pure, as compassionate as Alara's. The path forward, illuminated by her quiet kindness, was now clear. The day arrived with a sense of impending drama, a quiet tension that vibrated through the very air, almost humming with unspoken expectations. It was the annual Sterling Enterprises shareholders' meeting, an event that, for Serafina and Julian, was usually a mere formality, a public display of their inherited power and influence. An occasion to reinforce their position at the apex of the family hierarchy. This year, however, there was an added layer of anticipation. Rumors had been swirling through the financial world about a significant shift in Kaelin Sterling's financial strategies, whispers of new philanthropic ventures and a potential restructuring of the family trust. Serafina and Julian had arrived early, their faces alight with speculative greed, convinced that whatever Kaelin planned, it would ultimately benefit them, solidifying their control over the vast empire. They were impeccably dressed, their expressions a carefully curated blend of grave responsibility and expectant triumph, each convinced they were playing their parts perfectly. The grand boardroom adorned with dark wood paneling, historical portraits of Sterling patriarchs whose stern gazes seemed to judge all within, and a massive, highly polished mahogany table, buzzed with the low murmur of shareholders, executives, and legal counsel. At the head of the polished mahogany table, Kaelin Sterling sat, his posture relaxed, almost too relaxed for such a momentous occasion, a subtle hint of the calm before a storm. His gaze swept over the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Serafina, who was regaling a small group with a self-congratulatory tale of her latest charity initiative, her voice a little too loud, her laugh a little too forced. His eyes then moved to Julian, who was attempting to intimidate a junior executive with a condescending lecture about quarterly reports, his usual arrogance on full display. They were utterly oblivious, lost in their own self-importance, blinded by their own avarice and perceived victory. Just as the meeting was about to commence, a hush falling over the room as the clock struck the appointed hour, the heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open with a slow, deliberate creak. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, rippled through the attendees, a wave of shock washing over the room. Standing there, framed by the opulent doorway, was a figure of imposing presence, radiating an undeniable authority that silenced all chatter. He was Kaelin, but not the Kaelin they had expected. Not the quiet, contemplative man they usually saw, nor the meek Alistair Finch. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, the fabric impeccable, a silent testament to his immense wealth and formidable power. His hair, once subtly disheveled as Alastair Finch and now free of his disguise, was impeccably styled, gleaming under the boardroom lights, framing a face devoid of its former meekness. His eyes, no longer downcast or meek, held a piercing intensity, a cold, unyielding resolve that seemed to cut through the very air. Beside him stood Mr. Harrison Thorne, Kaelin's formidable lead counsel, a man whose reputation for ruthless efficiency and unwavering loyalty to Kaelin preceded him, his presence alone signaling the gravity of the moment. Seraphina's self-satisfied smile faltered, replaced by a look of bewildered confusion, her perfectly composed features crumpling into disbelief. Julian's jaw went slack, his eyes widening in dawning horror. They stared, their minds struggling to reconcile the imposing figure before them with the destitute Alastair Finch they had so recently discarded, mocked, and expelled. The resemblance was uncanny, chillingly so, yet utterly impossible, or so they desperately wanted to believe. Kaelin walked slowly towards the head of the table, his steps deliberate, measured, each one a hammer blow to their complacency. His gaze remained fixed on Seraphina and Julian, a silent, damning indictment. A profound hush fell over the room, all eyes riveted on the unfolding drama, a palpable tension gripping every person present. He reached the table, Mr. Thorne taking a strategic position behind him, a silent sentinel of justice. "Good morning, everyone," Kaelin's voice resonated through the silent room, calm, clear, and utterly authoritative, a voice that commanded attention. "Thank you for attending this crucial meeting. There are a few personnel matters and a significant change in the Sterling Trust that I need to address." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing the tension to build to an unbearable crescendo, savoring the silence that preceded the storm. His eyes, now burning with an icy fire, finally settled on Seraphina and Julian, holding their gaze with an unyielding intensity. "Aunt Seraphina, Cousin Julian," he began, his voice dripping with an almost mocking politeness, a subtle, cutting sarcasm. "I believe we have a matter to clarify. You may recall a relative who recently sought your assistance. A distant cousin, Alastair Finch." Seraphina's face paled, the color draining from it as if by magic. Julian shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a flicker of dawning horror, an undeniable recognition in his eyes. They suddenly understood. The pieces of the puzzle, so conveniently dismissed, so easily ignored, now clicked into place with a horrifying, undeniable finality. Their carefully constructed reality was crumbling before their eyes. You can't be." Seraphina stammered, her voice barely a whisper, a strangled sound of disbelief. "But Alastair? He was." Her mind reeled, grasping for a plausible denial, but finding none. Kaelin's smile was thin, devoid of humor, a cold, hard line. "He was indeed. He was me. And I must say your hospitality, or lack thereof, was quite enlightening." His voice hardened, each word a hammer blow, cutting through the last vestiges of their denial. "I came to you, not as the heir of sterling enterprises, cloaked in power and privilege, but as a man in need, a supposed distant relative seeking a hand up. I sought kindness, compassion, and a simple act of familial decency." He paused, allowing the shame to wash over them, a stark contrast to their previous disdain, their smug self-satisfaction. "What I received, however, was disdain, ridicule, and ultimately, humiliating cruelty designed to cast me out as an inconvenience." Julian, finally finding his voice, stammered, "Kaelin, this is absurd." "A test? Why would you?" We thought you were a scammer. An imposter." His voice was laced with a desperate plea for understanding, for forgiveness, for any way out. Kaelin laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the silence, devoid of mirth, full of bitter truth. "An imposter? You, Julian, who forced me to clean your break room for pennies, knowing full well I was supposedly destitute, a man barely able to feed himself? You, Seraphina, who offered me a paltry sum to vanish, too concerned about the stain on your social calendar, the inconvenience to your carefully cultivated image? No, the impostor was the illusion of family you presented, the pretense of care you offered to the world, while denying it to a supposed relative in need." He turned to the gathered shareholders, his voice gaining volume and authority, filling the grand room. "For months I have observed. I have seen the true character of those I once considered family, those who believed they were entitled to my legacy, to the fruits of a lifetime of hard work and foresight that was not their own." He gestured to Mr. Thorne, his gaze unwavering. "Mr. Thorne, if you would be so kind as to present the revised Sterling Trust documents." Mr. Thorne stepped forward, a thick legal binder in his hands, its weight symbolic of the profound changes it contained. His voice, crisp and professional, cut through the tense silence. As per Mr. Sterling's explicit instructions and following a thorough review of past financial practices and extensive documentation, the Sterling Trust has undergone a comprehensive restructuring. Effective immediately, the significant inheritances previously designated for Serafina Sterling and Julian Sterling have been reallocated. Their positions on the board of directors for all Sterling subsidiaries, and their access to any company funds or assets, are hereby revoked. The words hit Serafina and Julian like a physical blow, stripping them bare of their power, their future, their very identity. Their faces, once flushed with indignation, now drained of all color, turning ashen. They opened their mouths, desperate to protest, to deny, but no sound emerged, only ragged gasps. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs, the shareholders aghast at the public spectacle, but also keenly aware of the absolute power Kalen wielded, and the decisive, irreversible nature of his actions. Kalen looked at his aunt and cousin, his expression one of cold finality, a complete absence of pity. You believed my wealth was your birthright. You believed my compassion was a weakness to be exploited, a naivety to be mocked. But the true measure of a person is not found in the light of their prosperity, but in the darkness of their adversity. You failed that test spectacularly. And as a result, you have forfeited everything you believed was yours. He stood tall, a formidable figure of justice, the architect of their downfall, and the master of his own destiny, his gaze unwavering. The masks had fallen, and the true faces of greed and virtue were laid bare for all to see, undeniable and unvarnished. The aftermath of Kalen's revelation was swift, brutal, and undeniably satisfying to the omniscient narrator who had watched the unfolding drama with detached precision. For Serafina and Julian, the fall was not merely financial, it was a catastrophic obliteration of their entire identity, their carefully constructed world imploding around them. Stripped of their positions, their access to the Sterling fortune, and perhaps most devastatingly, their social standing, they crumbled, their carefully maintained facade shattering into irreparable pieces. Serafina, who had always prided herself on her impeccable reputation and her carefully curated network of influential friends, found herself suddenly persona non grata. The phone calls stopped, her meticulously planned charity events received no RSVPs, invitations dried up, her name whispered now in hushed tones of derision, not admiration. The very people who had once fawned over her, hoping to bask in the reflected glory of the Sterling name, now averted their gazes, whispering behind cupped hands, eager to distance themselves from her public disgrace. Her charity work, once a facade for self-promotion, now became a public mockery as news of her disinheritance spread like wildfire through the social columns. Without the Sterling funds to prop up her lavish lifestyle, her mansion became a burdensome symbol of her former glory, too expensive to maintain, its grandeur now mocking her diminished status. She was forced to sell, her designer clothes and precious antiques auctioned off to pay accumulating debts. A humiliating public spectacle. The narrator watched with a detached amusement as the woman who had dismissed a suffering relative with a flick of her hand now found herself dismissed by society with equal, if not greater, contempt. She had sown seeds of arrogance and reaped a bitter harvest of isolation, left with nothing but the echoes of her own self-importance. Julian fared no better. His eco-solutions startup, built on the premise of his Sterling connections and his supposed access to family capital, imploded with dizzying speed. Investors, wary of his sudden lack of affiliation with the powerful Sterling name and sensing the shift in power, pulled their funds, leaving him with nothing but a mountain of liabilities. His carefully constructed image as a financial wunderkind shattered, revealing him as nothing more than a shallow opportunist, his brilliance unmoored from any true integrity. He lost his penthouse, his luxury cars, and the respect of his peers, who now saw him for the hollow man he truly was. He tried to rebuild, to leverage what few contacts he had left, but the stain of his public humiliation, combined with Kalen's quiet but firm directive to key industry players to avoid any dealings with him, ensured his professional exile. He who had gleefully exploited Kalen's vulnerability, now found himself adrift in a sea of his own making, his arrogance replaced by a gnawing despair, the cold reality of his new existence a constant torment. The irony was palpable. The man who had banished Kalen to a storage room now faced a future where even a storage room might be a luxury he could not afford. While Serafina and Julian spiraled into a self-made abyss, consumed by their losses, Kalen set about his true purpose. rewarding the genuine kindness he had found. He visited Alara at her humble cottage, no longer as the destitute Alistair, but as the powerful Caelan Sterling, his presence radiating a quiet authority that was now his true self. He found her in the community garden, tending to the flowers with the same quiet grace and dedication he had first observed, her spirit untouched by the world's harshness. "Alara," he began, his voice gentle, imbued with a profound respect. "There's something I need to tell you, something important." He revealed his true identity, explained the elaborate test he had undertaken, and recounted, with a touch of profound gratitude that resonated deeply within him, how her unwavering compassion had shone brightest in his darkest, self-imposed hour, how her simple act of kindness had meant more than any fortune. Alara's reaction was a study in pure shock and disbelief. Her eyes widened, her hands, still covered in soil, trembled slightly. Her breath caught in her throat. "Caelan Sterling? The Sterling family?" she stammered, her mind struggling to process the enormity of the revelation, the sudden, unimaginable shift in her reality. The kind, quiet man she had sheltered, the one who had helped her with chores, the one she had simply seen as a fellow human in need, was the very billionaire who owned half the city, whose name was synonymous with impossible wealth. Caelan smiled, a genuine warm smile that had been absent during his masquerade, a smile that reached his eyes and lit them with true contentment. "The very same. And because of your extraordinary kindness, your selfless generosity when I had nothing, when I was at my most vulnerable and discarded, I want to ensure you and your family never have to worry again." He presented her with a deed to a beautiful, spacious home with a large garden, not far from her beloved community garden, a place where she could continue to cultivate life and beauty. It was fully furnished, comfortable, and hers free and clear, a haven of peace and security. He then established a substantial trust fund in her name, enough to provide for her family's needs for generations, to cover her brother Mateo's medical expenses without a second thought, and to allow her to pursue her dreams without financial burden. Furthermore, he offered her a leading role in a new philanthropic initiative he was launching, focused on community development and sustainable living, a project that aligned perfectly with her values and passion, giving her the platform to extend her kindness to countless others. Alara was overwhelmed. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow, but of profound gratitude and disbelief, a deluge of emotion. She tried to protest, to say it was too much, that she didn't deserve it, that she had only done what any human should do. Caelan gently placed a hand on her arm, his touch firm and reassuring. "You deserve every bit of it, Alara. More than anyone I have ever met. You showed me that true wealth lies not in what one accumulates, but in what one gives, in the generosity of spirit. You reminded me that kindness is the most precious currency, the only one that truly enriches life. And for that I am eternally grateful, for you have given me a clarity I could never buy." The narrator observed Alara, her initial shock giving way to a quiet, profound joy, a sense of deep, abiding peace. She was not a woman who craved luxury, but one who yearned for security and the ability to help others, to alleviate suffering. This reward was not just money. It was freedom, peace of mind, and the validation of her intrinsic goodness. It was a stark contrast to the hollow materialism that had consumed Serafina and Julian. While they faced destitution, Alara, through her genuine compassion, had found an abundance beyond her wildest dreams. The scales of justice, though often slow, had finally balanced with exquisite precision, demonstrating a truth far greater than mere financial transactions. Months turned into a year, and the dust settled over the dramatic upheaval in the Sterling family. Caelan Sterling had found a profound sense of peace, a quiet contentment that had eluded him for years. He continued to manage Sterling Enterprises with his characteristic acumen, his sharp intellect now honed by a renewed purpose. His business decisions were now infused with a deeper ethical core, prioritizing sustainable practices, fair labor, and employee well-being, guided by the indelible lessons learned from his time as Alistair Finch. He had purged the corporation of the opportunistic elements, installing honest, capable leaders who valued integrity as much as profit, rebuilding the company's foundation on principles stronger than mere ambition. He often visited Alara, not as a magnanimous benefactor, but as a trusted friend, sharing quiet conversations over tea, discussing their joint philanthropic ventures, a simple ritual that brought him more contentment than any lavish gala or high-stakes business deal ever could. He had proven his point, exposed the hypocrisy, and in doing so had liberated himself from the cynical expectations of his own world, creating a new legacy built on truth and genuine connection. Alara, now comfortably settled in her new home, surrounded by the vibrant growth of her garden, flourished. The trust fund provided for her family's every need, allowing her brother Matteo to receive the best medical care and begin a hopeful recovery, and her parents to live out their golden years in comfort and dignity, free from the crushing weight of financial worry. She embraced her leading role in Kaylin's new philanthropic foundation with passion and dedication. Her innate kindness, practical wisdom, and deep understanding of community needs made her an invaluable asset, ensuring that the foundation's vast resources were directed to those truly in need, empowering communities, and fostering genuine, sustainable change. She remained the same humble, compassionate Alara, untouched by the sudden shift in her fortune, her spirit unwavering. The narrator noted how she used her new position not for personal gain, but to amplify her capacity for good, a living testament to the adage that true character reveals itself not when given much, but when given the opportunity to give. She established local community centers, initiated educational programs for underprivileged children, and championed environmental projects, all with the quiet dignity and unwavering empathy that Kaylin had first admired, her actions a ripple effect of the kindness she had shown him. As for Serafina and Julian, their lives had become a stark and painful lesson in the consequences of unchecked greed and callous indifference. They struggled, not with the destitution they had wished upon Alistair, but with a far more insidious poverty, the poverty of spirit and reputation. They were pariahs in the world they once dominated, reduced to taking meager jobs, constantly haunted by the specter of their lost grandeur, their former lives a cruel, distant dream. Their attempts to regain their footing were met with cold indifference, for the world, once so eager to embrace them for their name, now remembered their cruelty, their public humiliation a brand upon their souls. The narrator observed their descent with a detached, almost clinical satisfaction. They had believed wealth was their shield, their ultimate protection, but it had proven to be their greatest vulnerability, the very foundation upon which their lives were built crumbling beneath them. The story of Kaylin Sterling, of Alistair Finch, and of Alara resonated with a profound, timeless truth. It served as a potent reminder that the true measure of a person's character is seldom found in the dazzling light of their prosperity, amidst the comfort and flattery it brings. Rather, it is revealed in the murky, challenging depths of adversity when all external trappings are stripped away. It is in the shadows, when comfort is removed and the veneer of social niceties crumbles, that the true essence of the human spirit is laid bare. Kindness, offered without expectation of reward, without calculation or self-interest, is a force more powerful than any fortune, a currency that never depreciates. It is a seed planted in barren ground that, when nurtured by genuine empathy, can blossom into a legacy far more enduring and far more meaningful than any inherited wealth, a legacy that truly transcends generations. Indeed, while some believe that money makes the man, this tale powerfully demonstrates that it is the heart, in its purest form, that truly dictates destiny and ultimately decides who is worthy of its boundless, enduring gifts. If you were moved by Kaylin's journey and Alara's unwavering kindness, you'll find many more powerful stories of transformation, justice, and unexpected blessings right here on our channel. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another captivating tale. Now we want to hear from you. What surprised you most about Serafina and Julian's reaction to Alistair? If you were Kaylin, would you have revealed your identity in such a public way, or would you have chosen a different approach? How do you think Alara's life will change, and what do you think she'll do with her new opportunities? What did you find to be the most profound lesson in the story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love reading your insights and connecting with our community.